One of the things that have us really excited going into the first XFL season is the diversity in XFL offenses, just the different backgrounds of coaching staffs, the different offensive systems that they bring. I mean, really, you don't see the diversity of different offensive schemes that you would see in the XFL and other leagues.
No, especially in the NFL, right? So if you watch games on Sunday, aside from maybe the Baltimore Ravens currently, everybody kind of runs the same stuff, right? The same type of run plays. You kind of have different sects here and there. But for the most part, everybody kind of runs the same stuff because it's the boys' club. What's awesome about the XFL is the diversity of offenses because you have a mix of kind of the NFL game with a mix of the college game. So that's why I'm pumped about it. I think it's going to be awesome to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the NFL has evolved as a league, but they've kind of evolved together. You have your one-offs like a Baltimore that's kind of adjusted to Lamar Jackson, but for the most part, everybody's running the same stuff.
Yeah, the biggest thing with the NFL is defenses. On defense, there's so many like athletic studs and freaks. They take away a lot of the concepts you're able to run in college where you're not going to run. You can't run the triple option in the NFL. I know that's an extreme example, but you can't run that because, a nose tackle can, run down a quarterback, in the NFL.
But that being said, no one thought you could run the air raid offense in the NFL. And look at the last few quarterbacks taken in the NFL. You had Baker Mayfield. You got Kyler Murray. I think even Jared Goff was a air raid type of QB in college. So, I do think the NFL is adapting, to your point, Glass. But I do love the fact that the XFL is going to be way more diverse than what the NFL currently is.
I mean, You're talking about air raid, run and shoot concepts down in Houston. You have your more traditional type of what you see in the NFL and places like New York and DC. You have your West Coast teams, kind of West Coast hybrid with air raids. So you kind of get a little bit of everything in the XFL. And I think if we're going to discuss the different offenses that you're going to see in the league, you have to start with the father of the air raid offense that Bob Stoops brought in Hal Mumme. I mean, could you have hired anyone better if you want to really, spread the ball around? Bringing in the father of the damn concept in Hal Mumme is a great place to start, right?
Yeah, no kidding. So he invented what is now known today as the modern air raid. There are a lot of concepts that he took from Lavelle Edwards at BYU and some other guys in the 70s and 80s, but he actually came up with it. What we know is the air raid today with Mike Leach at the University of Kentucky. And Tim Crouch, it's really what made Tim Crouch a #1 overall draft pick. So you bring him in, a ton of experience, and what you have to know about the air raid is really spacing. So what they want to do is anytime they see man coverage, they want to get vertical, right? They want to send 4 or 5 wide receivers down the seams of the field and try to throw it up to one of their athletes because we have more guys running down the field that we can find a mismatch somewhere. And then for zone coverage, their whole thing is spacing, right? We're going to spread you out sideline to sideline, and we're going to find those natural gaps. And so that's why I'm excited for it because you're going to see about, 75 to 80% throwing the ball down there, which is going to be incredible to watch Landry Jones just light it up. It's going to be great.
Hey, Glass, so it's obviously going to be more pass happy in the air raid. My question is, for all offensive linemen, is that something that you have to have a strong offensive line to run that kind of offense, or is that something that you can kind of compensate for a weak offensive line?
No, you can actually compensate. Well, actually, let me put the disclaimer that anytime you have a bad offensive line,
you're going to suck.
I don't think there's really not a whole lot you can do on offense to mitigate having a bad offensive line. But if that's kind of one of your more average parts of your team, you can get away with it. One of the big emphasis of the air raid is actually the tunnel screen. It was kind of the invention of the tunnel screen was because of the air raid offense. And it was a way for them to not have to line 2 backs up off of there and, bring that extra guy into the box to have 8 men, right? They could still spread out 4 or 5 wide and still have somewhat of a kind of a shorter pass game, which actually turned into their run game. What I'm curious to see is if Hal Mumme kind of does what Lincoln Riley has done, which Lincoln Riley's taken the air raid offense and he's put in a lot of gap scheme run games, but he's also put in a ton of RPO game. So he's taking the air raid of what Mike Leach and him did at Kentucky and what you saw at Baylor and what you saw at Texas Tech, and see if he's going to mix in that RPO game. That's what I'm curious to see. I would imagine he will. He's, an offensive guy. So I would anticipate seeing a lot of that, actually.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Gless, but I believe one of the main concepts of the air raid when it comes to the offensive line is the spacing of the linemen. That's kind of what makes it a lot different than more of your traditional style of offense. So it kind of widens and lengthens the passing lanes to, one, give the quarterback a larger window to throw to, but make it kind of a longer path to sack the quarterback. So that's kind of an area where you can kind of compensate if you have an average offensive line at play. But I believe Hal Mumme is known for saying the phrase "see the grass, take the grass." So you're gonna see a ton of 4 wide receiver sets and guys, like you said, Gless, when they're in the zone, just finding that spacing and just kind of moving it down the field and kind of just dissecting your defense.
Yeah, you're, again, like you said, Riley, if they see zone coverage, they have route concepts to specifically attack those zone coverages, especially short, right? You don't, it's pretty hard to attack zone coverages down the field with 5 wide just because there's a lot of bodies, right? But when you get man coverage, that's when you want to start getting vertical. And I'm going to cover this in a later series, but really the main passing concept that the air raid is known for, and you see it all over football now. You see it in high school, you see it in college, is really the mesh concept. And it's really easy. I promise all you guys, and even every viewer has watched it, but it's when the 2 inside guys essentially at 6 yards cross each other, right? It's like a natural pick, right? Yeah. One guy goes over, the other guy's over. They actually used to teach it in practice where those guys would actually have to slap hands in 7-on-7. Because they wanted that natural rub to where it's close. And so for the quarterback, you're sitting back there, and if it's zone coverage, I'm just looking for my window, right? They can only drop so many guys back there, so I'm looking for my window. But Riley, you're 100% right. It's all about spacing and finding those windows in the defense, and that's what the air raid is really predicated on.
I want to move to another air raid offense that you're going to see with a little more of a question mark in terms of the play caller. I mean, when you go from Hal Mumme to anybody and you're talking air raid, you're kind of, going to be more of a question mark. But when you look at the St. Louis BattleHawks and Doug Meacham, you have a guy that made a name for himself at TCU when they had, Pastel's boy, the Red Rocket.
Hey,
but
Andy Dalton.
Yeah, his time kind of ran out at TCU. He went to Kansas where, coaches typically go to die. Got fired there, and now he finds himself in St. Louis with the BattleHawks. Glessner, are we going to be seeing a lot of same from Doug Meacham? I mean, the biggest rap on him, if I'm not mistaken, is he's a very aggressive play caller, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. And I think towards the end it was more of a bad thing, which is why he finds himself in the XFL right now. Yeah,
we also coached at Kansas. That's pretty tough. That's a tough draw. You don't get.
That's why I said
I don't care
where coaches go to die.
Yeah, right. Like at the end of the day, offense is offense, and you still got to have players. And I think it was probably, if you look at it, he probably got a payday from Kansas to go there to take him away from TCU. But what you're going to see is what you're going to see a lot of in Dallas. He's an air raid guy. He was a Big 12 offensive coordinator who loved to wing the ball, who loved to spread it out. And distribute amongst his playmakers. So I would anticipate you're going to see a lot of the same things that what you'll see in Dallas, you're going to see in St. Louis as well.
Yeah, and he was a Broyles Award finalist in 2014. That's the top assistant coach in college football. So, it's not like he's some nobody who's coming out of nowhere to take over the offense. I mean, he had a tough go. Maybe his last year at TCU wasn't great, and he lost play calling duties. And then he went to, like we just talked about, went to Kansas, and that's nobody's won in Kansas since Mark Mangino left. But again, you don't become a Broyles Award finalist if you're not a good coach. That means that's a peer selected award.
Yeah. I think Glessner, you said something very interesting when you were talking about Hal Mumme taking from Lincoln Riley. I think you can see a ton of that here based on the quarterback that St. Louis has in Jordan Ta'amu. running those RPOs. I think that if you're
if
you're a Doug Meacham, you have to take advantage of RPOs as much as you can.
Yeah. No, I agree. I actually didn't even think about that, but a guy who ran that stuff at Ole Miss, so why wouldn't you utilize that skill set here? And RPOs are, I wouldn't say they're like a new thing, just kind of everybody knows the acronym, but it's really coming commonplace in passing games now. So I don't care, if you're Hal Mumme or if you're Mike Riley or if you're Kevin Gilbride. Like, I think everybody will probably utilize some sort of RPO concept or concepts in their offense, right? It's just, it's a way to outnumber your opponent at the point of attack.
All right, so let's jump to another team that I think, for me personally, I'm most excited to see this offense and how it works in the XFL, and that's going down to Houston and June Jones and the run and shoot. Yep. So, like, Gless, when you see the formations between June Jones and Hal Mumme, you're going to see a lot of the same type of personnel, a lot of 4 wide, but the concept is completely different.
Yeah, you couldn't be more correct. So if you looked at both of them pre-snap, they're going to look very similar. You're going to see 2x2, which is 2 receivers on each side of the formation. You're going to see a lot of trips open, which is just your 3x1. But they couldn't be more different from a concept standpoint. So the run and shoot, has about 5 or 6 passing concepts, and it just mainly sticks to that. And the whole offense and the whole passing game is predicated upon my route is going to change based on what the defense is doing. So, for example, if I have 2 safeties and I'm the inside slot, my route's going to be a lot different than if they're only showing 1 safety. And so it takes a lot of repetition with quarterbacks and receivers and getting used to timing. I think timing's one of the things in the run and shoot that a lot of people don't realize, but here's the thing. Once you get past the linebackers and before the safety, you got to hit them right there. And you have to hit them on the right route, right? So you may see some interceptions early in the run and shoot just because it's the quarterback getting used to the receiver and the receiver didn't read the defense right. But that's really all it's predicated on. If my corner is sitting on the inside and I'm running the go concept, going to be different than if the corner has outside leverage on me. But like my route as a receiver is different. So the quarterback has to see that, and then the receiver has to see that, and then they adjust accordingly.
It spreads the responsibilities around where, like you said, the receiver is more responsible for identifying the route that they need to. So like you said it perfectly. I think at the beginning with Phillip Walker, if he's your starter in Houston, when we get to February, you're going to probably see a decent amount of interceptions, decent amount of turnovers because, it just takes time to develop chemistry, whether you're running the run and shoot, the air raid or whatever, but let alone the run and shoot where you have to have that connection, that chemistry, that understanding of the routes that need to be ran. I mean, I'm looking at this quote from June Jones, and he says basically the run and shoot is more reliant on the receivers to read the coverage for the quarterback and then more of a progression for the quarterback. So basically mimicking exactly what you said, Glessner. But I think once that chemistry is down, when you look at the run and shoot as it compares to the rules that the XFL is proposing, it's going to be extremely fun to watch.
There's going to be so many points scored.
Oh my God, it's going to be awesome.
Because like to defend the run and shoot, I've never had to defend it. So my mind immediately goes, well, you essentially have to trick the receiver into thinking you're in one coverage and then do it but you can only do that like with 1 week preparation, right? You don't think that they've repped that in practice already? Like they only run like 5 or 6 concepts. That's like it.
So my question to you is, I feel like, well, why don't more schools run this? I feel like the only school I ever see run this is SMU, Hawaii. Yeah. Not a lot of colleges run it, but why?
Correct. If I'm not mistaken, with Spurrier, right, Gless? Spurrier was a big run and shoot guy.
It's a variation of it. It's a running gun.
It's a variation of I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. But it definitely wasn't. No, he's not a run and shoot guy. And that's a good point, Pastel. I don't really have a good answer other than it just takes a lot of time to install and get good at. Right?
So my question is, if it's an offense that takes a lot of time to install, get good at, a lot of reps, We're looking at a new football league that really they won't get their first reps until December, January, and then they're going to start in February. So how successful will it really be with such a short time to get good at it?
So that's a great point, and this is how I think of it, and I'm curious to get your guys' opinion. I've always been of the mindset offensive guys are very offensive coaches, offensive coordinators, they're very control focused, right? They want to move the pieces on the chessboard. They want to have the big clipboard with all these plays on it. Hey, what am I going to call on 3rd and 2 when they're rolling down a 9th guy in the box, right? Oh, well, the run and shoot takes that out of it, right? There is no I'm in control of what play I'm running, right? Like I call the choice concept, and then it's really up to the quarterback and the receiver. And that's pretty much it, right? So I think there's probably a lot of ego into it. It's just, here's the other point, Pastel, like why don't more college teams run the triple option? It's kind of the same thing, right? Like there's only a certain amount of plays that you run, and there's really not a whole lot in your control. And then once you install it, you kind of let it go. I think it's more of an ego thing personally, because it's any offense. If you are a good coach and a good teacher, you can install schemes and install plays, right? But the ability for me to control every little thing that goes out on the field as a coach, I think that terrifies a lot of coaches. They want to have control over what goes on in the field.
See, and what they have working for them is that everybody is going to be developing chemistry. It's just kind of in different ways. So like you're simplifying the formations, simplifying the playbook. It's just more of time of developing chemistry where and this is a good transition, you go to more traditional offense. Let's go up to New York and Kevin Gilbride. He runs at least what he did in the NFL. We'll see if he kind of adapts in the XFL. His playbook is pretty damn thick, and it's very heavily reliant on the quarterback making reads, making decisions. So while in the run and shoot, you have to develop that time and chemistry, it simplifies everything else, where over in New York, it may not take as much in terms of developing communication and chemistry on the field, like mid-play, but the playbook itself and the schemes are much more of a complex thing that teams have to work out.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, one of the things about guys that come from the NFL and guys that install offenses in the NFL is, again, their playbook is really big. And a lot of that has just happened over time. Like the West Coast playbook is really large, right? Because you have a different—
They're like play hoarders.
Right. Well, right. Like, and your play calls are like 3 sentences long, right? Because you're tagging everything over and over and over and over. I would anticipate that it's going to take a little bit of time for Matt McGloin to get that playbook down, right? And there in New York. Now, one of the other things to keep in mind when we talk about the run and shoot, Kevin Gilbride has run and shoot background. He was the offensive coordinator in Houston for the Oilers when Warren Moon, had his big run, and they ran the run and shoot. So he's familiar with those concepts, and he has run some of those concepts in the NFL. But to Riley, to your point, I think you're going to see a lot of different formations. You're going to see a lot of different motions. You're going to see a lot of different, 1 back, 2 back. You're going to see 2 tight ends. You're going to see 3 wide receivers. You're going to get a lot of different personnel packages out there. I think it's going to be something that you're a little bit more familiar to see on Sundays than you would see at the college ranks.
And Kenny, I know you've been following the New York Guardians very closely. You can see that in the personnel that they brought in.
Yeah, it's very interesting. They've got 2 big body receivers. They have your prototypical slot guy, smaller kind of scat kind of guy. And it's going to be interesting. What Gilbride's system are we going to see? Because he's kind of always evolved through the years. I mean, you have to, because the guy was a major player in the NFL as a coordinator or a head coach from the late 80s through the mid 2010s. So what are we going to see? Are we going to see the guy who had a run and shoot wide open offense for the Oilers, or are we going to see the guy who had guys like Brandon Jacobs, Kevin Boss, Jeremy Shockey, guys like that out in New York, where they ran a very traditional 1 back fullback type, or 2 back with a fullback type offense. So what Gilbride are we going to see? That's what's going to be interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kenny. Because to your, just what you said, he's done so much, right? Like he's kind of had his hands in a lot of different things. So I wonder if he's a guy, you know, maybe I'm giving him too much credit here, but he'll take a look at his talent and maybe he will kind of maybe take some stuff he's seen in the college ranks, some of the RPO game, and maybe kind of tweak what he's got instead of what he ran in New York. So I think that may be the bigger tell, is that we don't really know what he's going to do in New York. We know what he did as the offensive coordinator of the Giants, right? We know what he did when he was with the Oilers, but, you know, we may be getting a hodgepodge. I guess time will tell.
One advantage that New York has, and then we'll move on after this, is the quarterback that he brought in, while the physical talents don't jump off the page at you, McGloin, which we've talked about, you know, extensively when we've broken down the quarterbacks, check out at XFLChalkTalk.com and on YouTube to find those segments. But McGloin is played in NFL offenses. He has that NFL pedigree under his belt, so he'll be able to pick up Kevin Gilbride's system a lot quicker than some other quarterbacks that may not have the reps at the NFL level. But let's move down to Washington, D.C. Gless, I know you're a huge Pep Hamilton guy, and when you look at Pep Hamilton, the one thing that I love about Pep is just the physicality that he loves to bring to the game.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. You can look back at his days at Stanford and, you know, the influence that he had at Michigan, and him and Jim Harbaugh go way back. So, you know, when you think of a Jim Harbaugh offense, right, think of a little bit of what you saw in San Francisco. Think about what you saw at Stanford. And what you're going to see there is you're going to see, you know, kind of your traditional pro-style offense. And what I mean by that is you're going to see probably a lot of two-back offenses, right? You'll get a fullback, you'll get H-backs. But what you're also going to see is a lot of tight end play. And I'd be shocked to see him come out with 3-4 wide receivers instead of coming out with tight ends. If you look back at what he did at Stanford and a little bit of what you saw at Michigan, you saw a lot of what we call gap schemes, which is just the power play, the counter play, which is just a lot of down blocks, and you're pulling guards. You're rolling out with 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends, sometimes even 4 tight ends. And Riley, to your point, because it's smash mouth football, right? It's coming off the ball. It's I'm better than you. I'm the bigger man. I'm going to get about 4 or 5 yards on this power play, and we're going to be 2nd and 5 and set us up for a good, for a favorable 2nd down, right? So that opens up a lot of the play action game, a lot of the bootleg game, a lot of the stuff that you saw Andrew Luck do at Stanford and in Indianapolis originally, when he's calling out, hey, if I see a guy come down into the box, I'm checking to this run play on the other side because I know I have numbers to the left side instead of the right side, right? So I think you're going to see a lot of that, a lot of what you saw at Stanford and even some at Michigan.
And Gless, it's no surprise if you look at Pep's time in Stanford, there was 4 tight ends that he coached who got drafted off those teams. So, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how he utilizes and how he can squeeze the most out of the tight end in this league.
Well, when you look at the personnel that he brought in, Kenny, right. In the first phase, 3 of his first 10 picks were tight ends. Yep. So you know he's going to, like Gless said, he's going to be using the tight end, which June Jones, I don't even think, drafted a tight end. And then the defenders took 3 in the first 10 picks. But it's interesting, though, when you look at just the personnel that they brought in. They went with speed. They went with quick guys, maybe not the biggest guys on the outside like you see in New York, but they went with quick guys, a lot of tight ends, and 2 of the better running backs, possibly you could argue going into the season, the best 1-2 punch in Donnell Pumphrey and Jarrell Presley at running back. So you know they're going to be committed to the run as well.
Well, think about the speed. So that's a great point, and let's break that down for just a quick second. So, you get smaller, faster guys on the edge. Well, if you bring that 8th, 9th guy down because you have 2 tight ends and you got 2 speedsters on the outside, think about what that does in the play action game. You're probably going to get man coverage, right? You're going to get man coverage. You're probably not going to have a whole lot of players in the middle of the field. So you need burners. Right? You don't need good possession receivers. You need guys that can get down the field quick because you want to score quick. And that's how they're going to do it in DC. They're not going to do it by getting back in the shotgun and running tunnel screens and air raid concepts. They're going to do it on play action passes and hit them down the field. Imagine, like, think about Tyler Lockett. I think you're going to see nothing but a bunch of Tyler Locketts out on the field, like at the receiver
small,
position.
quick guys just
that
running
they're going to roll
all over the
out,
place.
man.
Oh man!
Hey, Gless, quick question, man. Cardell Jones, was he a good fit or not for that offense?
I think he is. I do. I think he's got the big arm to get the ball down the field, right? He's going to have a lot of tight ends that I think are going to be really open, right? A lot of tight ends releasing, crossing. He certainly has the arm strength. He certainly has the height, right? So he can look over the offensive line on the play action. You're going to see mostly under center stuff. I don't foresee them being in shotgun a lot. So you don't have to have like this overly small guy or this really small guy in shotgun, right? You can have a guy under center who's tall, who can look over the line, and as soon as he gets the ball, I mean, he can make his quick read and go.
I was going to ask the same exact question, Pastel. So,
well, I mean, it's kind of a trick question because he's one of the best quarterbacks in the XFL, so he can play.
Boom, there you go, Kenny.
Yeah,
right there with you, brother.
I don't know if that.
So good.
I don't know if that. I hope that last point made sense, though, right? Like
it does.
The play action game. It's under center. He can get clear reads. He can look over like he doesn't have to be in shotgun to get his reads because he's too short. If that makes sense.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on. We got a few teams left to go. Let's just keep going down the East Coast. Why not? In Tampa Bay, Marc Trestman. Gless, can you kind of break down what to expect with Marc Trestman? It's a little bit of West Coast with a little bit of your traditional pro style. Just what are we going to expect to see from a Marc Trestman offense?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a hybrid. I think, think of just kind of his history, right? He's done really well with quarterbacks in the past, all the way from the 80s all the way through. He was a CFL guy for a while as well. He has an NFL background. So I think you're going to see kind of a West Coast offense hybrid. And what do I mean by that? So I think you're going to see the analytical passing game, right? The time control, precision time passing,
pre-snap
as
motion,
far as
pre-snap
motions, bunch of variables or a bunch of variable formations, right? Personnel packages. I think you're going to see a lot of what Kevin Gilbride's going to do in New York as well. It may not be a lot of the same concepts, but I think you're going to see a lot of guys coming on the field, a lot of guys coming off the field because they're going to be changing personnel packages a lot. Just because he has that precision, passing, a lot of formations, and he really wants to get matchups, right? If I know I can get a matchup as the number 2 receiver, I'm going to go ahead and call this route concept that's going to get him open in the place that I think that they're going to have.
What and the one thing that's always I've always loved about Trestman is he's a very positionless coach. Like if you look at his time in Chicago, Brandon Marshall took in one season he took 300 snaps from the what you call quote unquote slot position. He's not a typical slot receiver, nor was he prior to coming to Chicago and playing under Trestman, but like you said, he's always looking at matchups. Matt Forte, the things he did as a playmaker in some of his best years toward the tail end of his career, past his prime, was under Trestman because Trestman found different ways to utilize them. He always talks about principles, not positions. He's a very the NBA right now is kind of in transition to a positionless game. That's how Marc Trestman kind of coaches his offenses.
That's one of the things.
I love what he's going to be able to do there dynamically.
That's one of the things, Kenny, that stands out to me is getting the running backs involved in the passing game. If you've watched our X Factors that we've been putting out every day for the last week or so, I had Tampa Bay, and mine was Quentin Flowers, a quarterback converted to running back. And I think the way that you get him involved is screens, wheel routes out of the backfield. So I see him playing that Matt Forte type of role. With Marc Trestman. Gless, the one thing though that I'm not as familiar with his CFL. I know that he won when he was in the CFL, at least one or two championships. He won a lot. I'm not as familiar with his personnel that he had up there, but I do know in the NFL he coached Joe Flacco when he was offensive coordinator in Baltimore. He coached Jay Cutler when he was in Chicago, kind of resurrected Jay Cutler's career, him and Adam Gase. But Aaron Murray is neither of those guys. Those are bigger guys. Right. They're not as quick. They have bigger arms. That's like the exact opposite of Aaron Murray. How do you think that the Aaron Murray fit in Marc Trestman's offense is going to work out?
Yeah. Well, I think Trestman is a smart guy when it comes to quarterbacks, and I think if you look at the long history of guys that he's had success with, he's going to put Aaron Murray in the best situation to succeed. So when we talk about principles, if he doesn't think Aaron Murray's going to be able to run 3 or 4 of the concepts he really wants to run, then he's not going to run it. Right. I think he's going to put Aaron Murray in the best situation to succeed and give him what he can digest, or we may all be surprised and maybe he catches on with Trestman and they just have that chemistry where he completely digests Marc Trestman's playbook and he's able to succeed. So I don't to kind of answer your question, I don't really know because I just haven't seen Aaron Murray play a lot. Right. Like dating, back in college at Georgia, the stuff he ran was pretty simple. Mark Richt's passing game is not overly complex, right? They ran kind of the same stuff over and over. So I'll be really curious to what type of principles that he uses. So when you guys mentioned Matt Forte, that's kind of why I led in with, I think you're going to see a lot of West Coast type of principles to get the ball out of his hand quick, get the ball into their playmakers, and try to get the matchups he wants so that they can move the ball down the field. I don't think you're going to see this barrage of vertical passing game. I think it's going to be very calculated.
Well, and to that point, Riley, I think one of the things that you look back at his resume, he's succeeded with a ton of different style quarterbacks. Like Rich Gannon had some of his best years with Trestman. Same with Steve Young. Those guys aren't known for having rocket ship arms or cannons on but then you turn around and Josh McCown and like to your point earlier, some of the quarterbacks you mentioned earlier who had were the traditional pocket style quarterbacks have had success as well. Look, dude, even Jake Plummer had some good years under Trestman. So he's been able to kind of be successful with a lot of different style quarterbacks. And the second thing is, if you look at how they drafted, it totally makes sense that he's going to kind of run positionless type stuff with, you're talking about your X Factor, Quentin Flowers, Nick Truesdale, guys who are could be potential mismatches for his offense at what they run.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Kenny. If we know one thing, we know Marc Trestman can coach the hell out of quarterbacks and he can coach offense. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. Let's go across the country to a guy that kind of runs somewhat of West Coast with a little pro style. Let's go to Seattle and Jim Zorn and Mike Riley. I guess Mike Riley is going to be calling the plays there, Gless. You bring him in as an offensive coordinator. He's coming off of a season where he was the head coach of the San Antonio Commanders in the AAF, and their first 2 draft picks were the 2 running backs that Mike Riley had in the AAF. So what can we expect to see in Seattle? Yeah,
so that's a really good point. I don't know who's going to call plays. I remember when Jim Zorn was the head coach of the Skins, one of the things that he said, he's like, if there's one thing I love to do it's to call plays. Now, that was close to a decade ago, so I don't know if that's still true or if he's going to let the reins go. My guess is in order to get a guy of Mike Riley's caliber, he probably had to concede calling plays. That would be my guess. Mike Riley, I know that his resume is a little bit all over the place. He was the head coach at Nebraska. He had a lot of success at Oregon State. He was in the NFL for years. I could be wrong. I believe he was the head coach of the Chargers twice.
I believe so.
I think it was either once. I know it was once, but I thought it was maybe twice. Regardless, in the coaching community, Mike Riley is very highly thought of, right? Like he has relationships all over the place. He knows offensive football. And to your point, Riley, I think what you're going to see is a little bit of hybrid of everything that he's done that he likes, which is a lot of West Coast offense when it comes to the running game. Right, so a lot of West Coast offense now, they love to run the zone play. So you're going to see a lot of inside zone, a lot of outside zone, some bootleg off of that stuff. But when it comes to the passing game, you're going to see a lot of vertical stuff down the field. There's not a whole lot of precision and running back out of the backfield and get 3 yards, to act as a run play. I think that's where he'll be a little bit different than Marc Trestman. He's still a schemer, I guess you could say. He's going to put his guys in the best chances to succeed, but make no bars about it. He wants to get down the field vertically in the passing game. And I think he's going to be able to set that up with the 2 running backs that he got. I mean, those are two of the best running backs in the AAF. So that's what you can expect to see.
Well, and Glessner, if you can remember when he was at, and really we'll dive into Oregon State here because that's where he spent most of his time. He always had solid quarterbacks at Oregon State. They were never like they never put up the biggest numbers, but they didn't turn the ball over, and they always leaned on guys like Ken Simonton. They always had remember him at running back. They had Steven Jackson was there. They always seemed to have better running backs than quarterbacks in his tenure at Oregon State. Plus, you had Chad Johnson and TJ Hushmanzada as well. That didn't hurt.
Yep,
that's right. He always did so much more with less at Oregon State.
Yep.
Like they have pretty low recruiting budget. I mean, Corvallis, Oregon may be like the biggest cow town in the entire United
There's
States.
nothing
Have
going
you really?
on in Court. Oh God, yeah, I've been to Corvallis.
How do you get recruits to come there? My point is he was still able to field really competitive teams at Oregon State and then occasionally hit on it. But again, I go back to his reputation in the coaching community. I mean, he's very highly thought of. He's a little bit, like I said earlier, a little bit of a schemer, but I can see a lot of the run game, being a little bit more dominant in the run game than I can see the pass game. But when I think of Mike Riley, I think of down the field pass game. Maybe a little bit of what you're going to see in DC as well. Mm-hmm. So I kind of think that he's a little bit closer there than he would be with Marc Trestman. That's just what I've seen from him. But
yeah. And it's no surprise if you look at Oregon State's career all-time leading rushers. Number 1, Ken Simonton. Jaquiz Rogers, number 2. You have Vincent Bernard and Steven Jackson, 3 and 4. All those guys played under Mike Riley. Like all 4, the top 4.
Yep.
No surprise.
Yeah. All right. So, it'll be interesting to see because you have 2 offensive minds. Mike Riley's very highly respected, like you said, Gless, in the coaching ranks. But if Seattle starts out like 0-2, 0-3, do you get kind of a taking the reins back from Jim Zorn? Is he going to get a little antsy about the play calling? So we'll see. Let's move on to our final team, the LA Wildcats. This was one of the biggest hires, in my opinion, in terms of bringing in an assistant coach because Winston Moss is the one true defensive-minded head coach. So he needed to bring in a guy where he can just be like, you deal with the offense. I don't deal with that at all. And I think Norm Chow, you can't do much better, especially with the pedigree that he has in the LA area from his time at USC. Gless, what can we expect to see from a Norm Chow offense?
Yeah, I think what you see in Seattle with Mike Riley is pretty similar to what you'll see in Los Angeles. I think back to his times at USC, and everybody was like, oh, West Coast offense is what they run. Well, they run some of that stuff, right? They'll run the zone play and they'll bootleg off of it and kind of get your different flood routes, right? Where you get a lot of guys in one space and you got to find the guy that's open, right? You're certainly going to get that, but make no mistake about it. His roots came from Lavelle Edwards at BYU, and those were very pass-heavy teams. Jim McMahon, Steve Young, Ty Detmer. I mean, kind of one of the I guess you would call it architects, founding fathers of what we would know as the air raid is today. So I think you're going to see a mix. You're going to see somewhat of what you did at USC, some West Coast stuff, especially in the run game. But I think the passing game, he's going to open it wide up. I think he's going to open it wide up. I think you're going to see a lot of exciting down the field action. You're going to see a lot of after the catch stuff. He's going to put his guys in a position, especially down the field. And if you look at their draft, and Riley and Kenny, you guys back me up on this because you loved what they did at receiver.
In the skill
Imagine
phase.
those guys in the skill phase. So think about what they're going to be able to do down the field. Again, he's classified as kind of a West Coast guy, but man, I think he's going to want to air the ball out. He's just going to do it from under center. That's all.
What's interesting to me is I'm curious to see if he can almost resurrect his career because it's kind of stalled out after his time at USC. You talked about what he did at BYU and the crazy kind of offenses they ran in the like you said, Steve Young, Ty Detmer, Jim McMahon, just all the offensive numbers they were putting up. And then he went to NC State and he got to work with Phillip Rivers, who broke all these records as a freshman. And then he went there to become the OC at USC. And of course, we know what he did at USC with Pete Carroll. and what they did. But then after that, he kind of bounced around with the Titans, and then he was the OC at UCLA, and then the OC at Utah, and then the head coach at Hawaii, and then he kind of never. I mean, he was with a high school. He was an assistant at a high school after that. His career kind of spiraled after USC, or not spiraled, but it stalled out. So can he regain that magic? Was he a benefit of having some elite talent around him? I don't think that's the case, but I'm just kind of curious as to see what we're going to see offensively.
Yeah. I mean, he's an older guy. I think, his kind of career, arc is kind of, it's coming, he's in the twilight years of coaching. I think for Winston Moss to bring him back is a huge get, especially for a league like the XFL. And you mentioned the personnel, Gless. I am psyched about this first phase of the first, they start off with running back. They bring in Elijah Hood out of UNC, who I'm a big fan of. Injuries have derailed him, so we'll see if he's bounced back, because it's been a while since we've seen him. Mm-hmm. But he was a beast. He was a monster at UNC, especially his junior year. He was first team All ACC. Then you bring in Larry Rose, that more dynamic back. You know what I think of when I see those two? I see Lendale White and Reggie Bush. That's what I see. When I look at these guys, I like to compare, who guys that they've coached in the past. Mm-hmm. So when I see a Hood and Rose, I see that kind of tandem being utilized, like Lendale White, who was a monster at USC, and then Reggie Bush, who we all know how good he freaking was. But then you take a look at the receivers. You bring in Rashad Ross, Nelson Spruce, KD Cannon. So you have the two dynamic running backs that bring, versatility.
Throw the ball, man.
But they're going to be throwing the ball. And Norm Chow, he likes to keep it as simple and as easy for the quarterback as possible. And when you have a quarterback that doesn't have a lot of experience, like a Luis Perez, who has the talent but just not the experience, matching him up with a Norm Chow, giving him the running backs in the backfield, and then those guys out, KD Cannon, Nelson Spruce, Rashad
and not
Ross.
only that,
those are some weapons, man, that you have to utilize.
And not only that, we sit there and we talk about their skill guys, and then you talk about we even talk about Kyaris Garrett or Kermit Whitfield. Whitfield's a super dynamic special teams player and just a guy who can take the ball to the house from anywhere he touches the football. And Kyaris Garrett broke tons of records at Tulsa. So offensively, they have everything they need to succeed. Luis Perez needs to deliver.
Hey, Gless, I don't know. Maybe I'm just playing devil's advocate here, or just the other side of the story, but I feel like a Luis Perez, who's a slower quarterback, a guy that can't really be mobile in the backfield. I feel like that type of offense needs somebody that's a little bit more mobile, that can allow the receivers to stretch the field, have that time to get down the field, to throw it down there. I feel like Luis Perez is a quick release kind of quarterback, has to get the ball out quick because he's going to get sacked. Like, he's not very mobile in the pocket. So
can I jump in here?
Offense? Go ahead, Riley.
Good, Riley.
See, no, I get what you're saying, Pastel, because I think, we've talked about Luis Perez, and that's kind of our knock is, he's just not a very mobile. It's hard for him to escape pressure. So we'll have to see how the offensive line plays out. But I look at guys who Norm Chow has coached in the past. I mean, Matt Leinart wasn't running RPOs at USC.
Carson Palmer.
No.
Yeah, Carson Palmer. I mean, who was his quarterback in Tennessee? Wasn't it like Kerry Collins?
No.
Who was
I think it was Vince Young.
Was it? I thought he coached Kerry Collins. Well, wasn't Kerry Collins after Vince Young? Oh, okay. Well,
I don't think he was. I don't think he was there for Collins. I mean, Collins might have been on the team, but Vince was definitely the starter.
I thought Vince Young left and or maybe he got hurt and Kerry Collins played for an entire year. I don't know. But my point is that the quarterbacks that he's coached in the past and has had success with aren't exactly the most mobile of quarterbacks. So I'm not really sure, unless you really break down the offensive line, it's kind of hard to tell, isn't it?
Yeah, but you're talking about Luis Perez versus Carson Palmer, like a Heisman winner. I mean, I get that they're not as mobile as each other, but we're talking about two different levels of quarterbacks.
All right, so here's what we have going on here. So you have everyone's picking their guy. Kenny picked Cardale Jones, who he's just going to bash on. Pastel has picked Luis Perez. Every opportunity you're getting, you're just bashing Luis Perez.
I don't think it's – I will say this. I think it's a little – unfair to both sides for either argument to compare Luis Perez. One, it's unfair to compare Luis Perez to any of the quarterbacks we just mentioned. Two of them are Heisman winners.
I'm saying is that they weren't mobile. I'm not saying he's the same caliber of quarterback.
No. Yeah, but if you're not mobile, then have a Heisman arm.
Luis Perez has a pretty damn good arm. I mean, this is the XFL. What do you expect?
Yeah, I mean, let's not let's not pretend.
I mean, he's got arm
quarterbacks
talent.
are going to be in this
He's got
league.
arm talent. Not disregarding that at all, man. I'm just saying, yeah, you can throw a highlight on there every once in a while where it's like, oh man, what a beautiful pass. What about the other 30% of passes, man? I don't know.
Yeah, there's a way to and Pasto, I see your point, and I think it's a valid one. But there's ways an offensive play caller can kind of help that out, right? That there's different formations you can run. You can keep an extra guy in. I mean, if you've got dynamic athletes on the outside that you want to get the ball, there's ways to do that with no pressure. So Norm Chow's been around the block. He knows what he's doing. He's been calling plays for, 30 years now. If he thinks Luis Perez is got it to be the best quarterback in the XFL, I mean, he's going to design stuff in order for him to become that. I think he has enough experience. He's dealt with quarterbacks from Vince Young, again, to your point, all the way at the Matt Leinart, who could barely move. So I think he'll figure it out. Norm Chow's a smart guy. He'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, Luis Perez is the kind of quarterback where you have to play to his strengths big time, especially with the lack of experience. When you look at Luis Perez, that's the one thing that concerns me the most is just the lack of experience, the lack of reps versus the kind of quality players that he's going to see in the XFL. And he showed signs in the AAF, but he was also extremely inconsistent. But that offense was just very unimaginative too, that he was dealing with the Birmingham Iron. So we'll see how Norm Chow utilizes that. But seriously, guys, I get siced for these kind of conversations, and we're going to break so what we're going to do is we're going to go off of this conversation, and Gless is going to, and we're going to be releasing this over the coming weeks. Gless is going to be breaking down offenses way more in depth than we even went today. So be on the lookout from these videos from Coach Gless. But seriously, guys, you're not getting this kind of in-depth discussion and analysis anywhere else. You're getting it right here at XFL Chalk Talk. So check us out at xflchalktalk.com. Interact with us on social media at XFL Chalk Talk. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So interact with us. We love discussing and breaking down the XFL with the XFL community. So leave a comment below what you think of the offenses. Which offenses do you think are going to mesh well with the XFL rules? Who's going to have the most success? Who are you concerned about? But be on the lookout for those videos from Coach Gless here in the coming weeks, breaking down the XFL offenses. What's up, football fans? This is Riley from XFL Chalk Talk. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all things XFL and interact with us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at XFL Chalk Talk.